Hey everybody, and welcome back to Jim's Garage. Today we're going to be looking at RKE2, Rancher Kubernetes Engine or Environment 2, I'm not sure, also known as RKE Government, and the clue is in the government and we'll come on to that in a minute. Now I've just completed my Kubernetes Home Lab series for K3S, which is a competing product by Rancher, owned by SUSE, who also make RKE2. So why are there different versions? Why is this RKE2? Let's get into that. So RKE2 is the successor of RKE1, and it's traditionally pitched more towards enterprise, with a focus on security, hence that government bit. K3S, on the other hand, is a lightweight distribution that isn't secured to the same degree as RKE. And in the previous videos, I've spun that up, and we'll come on to it in a minute what the key differences are. Now, off the bat, security is one of the key focuses of this, and hence that government name. So this is actually spun up to meet the demands of the CIS benchmark. That's the Center for Internet Security benchmark, and what that does is run a series of tests against your configuration to look for vulnerabilities. So for example, when you run this on K3S on a fresh install, you get something like 113 vulnerabilities. Now, not all of those are true vulnerabilities, some of them are warnings, some of them are false positives, but there are a considerable number there that you would want to remediate before putting this into a production environment. However, RKE2, when you run this on a fresh install, I only got 4 vulnerabilities. So, wasn't the 0 that they touted, but I think that's just because of my installation. But you can see a stark difference there. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to deploy RKE2. Now traditionally that's a little bit more involved due to the nature of it being more secure, the need to be operating as a root user for example. But for you awesome people out there, I've created an automation script. Now, same caveats, this is ugly, so please do submit some PRs to tidy this up a little bit. But if you follow this video, and we're going to be following the same processes as in my K3S video, that is a number of VMs that we're going to spin up and some variables we need to assign first to the script. But hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a replica of your K3S environment. However, it will be underpinned by RKE2. So you're going to get all of those security benefits off the bat. So as ever, I'm going to walk you through this script. I'm going to show you all of the bits that it does and why it's doing them, and then we're going to run it. But before I do that, we're going to head into Proxmox and get our environment set up so that we can run the script. And this will be exactly the same process as we did for K3S. We're going to take full advantage of Proxmox and Cloud Init so we can clone from a template and have the exact same virtual machine spun up multiple times. So just like in my previous video, I've spun up a number of virtual machines by right-clicking and cloning my template, specifying some names. Once those are deployed, I've gone into the hardware. Make sure you increase the hard drive space because I've had a number of people get caught out by that from the K3S one. So just click on here, disk action, and then resize it to make sure it's the right size. Also add any VLAN tags, etc. before you start this up. However, I'm going to fire all of these virtual machines up now. Whilst those are firing up, we're going to have a quick look through the documentation for RKE2. And then we're going to get into the deployment. So as you can see from the website, RKE2 boasts significant improvements in the security space. It's FIPS 142 compliant, it passes the CIS benchmark, and it's seen as having all of the lightweight benefits of K3S, but with those security benefits. So when I created this script, I was keen to see how similar the process was. And thankfully, it wasn't too different. The actual instructions here for the installation are pretty straightforward, and there's a handy quick install script, if you don't want to follow my script, that goes through and does this for you. But I wanted to replicate the setup that we had in the K3S video, where we had 5 distinct nodes, 3 of those are master nodes, 2 of those are workers, and we had an admin node that we could operate from and control our cluster remotely. So that's what the script's going to do. Oh, and it's also going to have kube-vip, so that we get a virtual IP for high availability, and we're also going to leverage it for load balancing. So the end of the script is automatically going to deploy Rancher for you, and it's going to be load balanced, and hopefully we should be able to access the GUI. The good news is also the subsequent videos that I have for K3S, so things like Longhorn for example, those scripts should be compatible with this. So once you have that up and running, create the extra VMs, run the Longhorn script, and then you should have Longhorn deployed on RKE2. So now back in Proxmox, let's just check that everything's running. All of these are up and running and started. That's great. So now we're in a position to go through the script and then look to start deploying it. So over on my code server, go check out that video if you haven't. It's awesome being able to do this within a web browser. I've got the script, and if you compare it to my previous one, the beginning looks simple, and I've consciously tried to do this to make it a similar experience to last time. So we're going to specify the virtual IP address. Remember, this is an IP address that's shared between all of the master nodes, so that when you do something like a kube control, where it's contacting the Kubernetes API, you can specify that virtual IP address which is shared between the nodes, and it doesn't really matter which one responds because they're all listening to requests on that IP address. That's the crucial part for high availability. So it doesn't matter if one of your nodes goes down because all of the nodes are going to be listening to that virtual IP address. Next, we've got the IP addresses for all of the nodes, and the only thing different here is I've specified the admin IP address, because we'll need that in a little bit because we need to copy a file from the first master node back to this one. Unfortunately with RKE there isn't a K3S up, that catch-up program that we used before, so I've had to do this manually. So basically replicating the functionality of what that does in a script form, which is why it's a little bit ugly. The rest is pretty similar. We've got the user of Ubuntu, so change the IP address, change the username to whatever distribution you're using. I've specified the interface because we're going to need that for the load balancer. On my instance, it's just eth0. Created the virtual IP address, so as I just mentioned, this is the IP address that's going to be balanced between the three nodes, so all three nodes will be listening to this IP address. Make sure this address isn't used within your network space already. Then I've just created the arrays that we're going to use later for when we loop through, iterate through them to deploy master nodes or worker nodes respectively. And the other important bit is at the bottom. We've got the load balancer range. So here I've just specified a range where all my services are going to be deployed. Again, make sure that no devices are going to be using this, so check things like DHCP ranges, etc. Lastly is the certificate name. Now, a few people got tripped up on this in the last video about where to get them from. So these are the certificates in my instance that I've taken from Proxmox in the /root/.ssh folder. So these are the SSL certificates that are on Proxmox when you default install it. And as part of creating my VM templates, I've used these exact same certificates so that I can copy these certificates onto my admin node, copy them over to all my VMs if needed, and use those to connect instead of using a password. We don't want to be using passwords. We want to be using SSL certificates for SSH connections. So now let's get onto the bit that hopefully you won't have to touch. Handily, there's a do not edit below. So to begin with, it's going to deal with the certificates. Now, I've tried to make this really simple, and you should only have to copy the certificates onto your admin home directory, as well as copying this script. So all this part here is doing is copying the certificates into the .ssh folder and just modifying the permissions. After that, it's going to look to install kube control if you haven't got it, so that we can do administration from this admin VM. Next up, it's going to go through and actually create the kube-vip. So here it's downloading a YAML file. Now this file here is just a copy from the official one, and the reason I've copied it to my GitHub is because I've changed one variable, and the variable that I've changed is the server part. So I've set server to be true, which is needed to have this in high availability with a load balancer later. And the reason I had to do that was because of this part here. You can substitute values in for the default one that's available on the official website, but it didn't have a variable in place to be able to change that server setting. So I needed to copy that by default and then put it on my GitHub. After that, I've just copied the file it creates, so when you run this process, it's going to populate the YAML file and it's going to spit it out into your home directory, and then later it's going to prepare that to copy it over to the first master node which we're going to bootstrap. It's also going to create the .kube file on your admin node because we want to copy the kube YAML file, so the kube config on our first master node. This is where it's got all your keys specified for your cluster. We're going to copy that back to this admin machine, and tell kubectl to use that config file, and that's going to give you the remote administration of your cluster. Next, we're going to create the RKE2 config file. And the important bit here is the TLS SAN. So this is going to be your virtual IP address. So this is basically telling all of the master nodes what it's going to be listening to. So on the first one where we bootstrap it, we load that in and say this is the VIP. And then on subsequent deployments of master nodes, we tell it to communicate via that VIP. So we know that if we get more than one master node up, we know that the VIP is listening and it's working, because otherwise it wouldn't be able to join. If we'd have just put in the IP address of another master node, it would be connecting just directly by an IP address that's assigned to that master node and not through the VIP. You could also add other nodes in there, the IP addresses, in case the VIP ever failed, but it shouldn't do. Now there's a trick here. Because I'm using something that's designed for K3S, i.e. kube-vip, we've got to change a couple of the paths. And so that's what I'm doing on the next bit. I'm looking for K3S and changing it to RKE2. Next, we're going to copy this kube-vip file to all of our master nodes, and we're going to do that in a loop. So it just iterates through, it copies over the kube-vip and the config file, and that gets us all set up for the next phase. The next phase is to connect and bootstrap the first master, install the RKE2, and then copy the token back to the admin machine. Now, the token is basically the private key. Before we didn't have to do that because Ketchup was taking care of it for us, but I'm having to copy the token back to the admin machine because we then need to use it as a variable later on in the script. So this section is going to go through, and you can see here it's going to pull RKE2 using the convenience script. It's going to enable the service, and then once this section has finished, it's bootstrapped the first master node. The next step is to set up kube-vip as a load balancer, and this isn't any different from how we did it in K3S. It's simply going to pull down the manifest file for the kube-vip cloud controller. Then it's going to create a config map, and we're going to crucially set this to use the load balancer range that we specified in the variables at the top. Now, as I just mentioned before, we're going to use this token, and I'm going to set the value of token, so this is a variable, to the value that's in that file. Once that's done, we're going to go into the RKE2 YAML, so this is the configuration file that RKE2 is going to use, and we're going to change the default, which is the local host 127.0.0.1, and I'm going to replace that with the VIP. So again, the admin machine that we're going to remote administrate is going to communicate with the VIP IP address and not any single IP address of a given node. And again, that's a good way to A, show that the VIP is working, and B, give us high availability, because the remote admin machine doesn't care which master node it talks to. It just says, hey, I'm going to communicate to you on your VIP. You guys sort out which node is responding to me. Once that's done, it's going to run the kubectl get nodes command, and hopefully it should print out the first master node and it should be ready. The next step is basically to replicate that process for the remaining two master nodes. And if you wanted to go crazy and spin up more master nodes, more worker nodes, you should just be able to amend at the top the number of items you've got in the respective arrays, and it should take care of that for you. So here it's just going to go through each of those master nodes. Because we've already copied over some of the configuration files, the only thing we need to do is to put that token, so that variable we copied over, back into the config file. We want to change it to the master 1. So this is actually going to communicate and set it up using master 1, but later on it's going to communicate over the VIP. So that's specified there as well. It's going to run the installation script, and then it's going to enable the services. So pretty much the same as before, just this is the secondary master node and third master node. It's not the bootstrapped first master node, which looks slightly different. Same with K3S. Finally, we're going to add the worker nodes. And again, a similar process. However, the configuration steps are different. So in this instance, we don't need to specify the SAN, i.e. what it's going to use to advertise itself. We just specify its server. And you'll notice here that the install script has the tag of RKE type agent, and crucially, and I didn't spot this the first time I ran it, the RKE2-agent service instead of the server service above. And that will set it up as a worker node, so it won't have all of the bells and whistles and all of the extra components that a master node requires. Next, we're going to set kube-vip to be a load balancer. and I did include this bit earlier, but for some reason I was having some issues with it not deploying. So I've included it here again, and if it does run again, it will just say that it doesn't need to be changed. So it will say unchanged. So there's no issue with running this command twice. And that's pretty much it if you just want a default cluster to be spun up without anything additional being put in there. However, step 9 is going to install Rancher, and it's going to use the exact same commands that I put in the previous video for K3S. So just quickly going through that, it'll install Helm, it will then add the repos, it'll install Cert Manager, which is required for Rancher, it'll then install Rancher itself, and then it will create a load balancer using kube-vip, exactly the same as in the K3S video. So if you want to learn a bit more about that, go check that video out. So let's now jump into our admin VM, copy over the necessary files, let's run this script, and fingers crossed we'll have an RKE2 cluster up and running. Okay, so I've connected now to my admin machine. So there's just two things that we need to do. The first is we need to copy this script that's available on GitHub. So I'm just going to right click, new file, just going to call this one RKE2.sh. And then I'm going to copy and paste the contents of the script into here. Now that's pasted in, and do remember to change the variables to your network settings, etc. We need to save this script, and if you remember from the last video, we need to make this executable. So that's that. And the final thing we need to do is just to copy over our certs. Now these are the same certs from Proxmox and the same ones that you've used when you did your cloud template. So just copy those into this folder. So what you'll need is the id_rsa.pub and id_rsa, the private key. Once you've got those in there, you're good to go. So heading over to our terminal, we're going to do the same process as before. So /rke2.sh and then just hit return. So now this script is going to go run through. Now as this is a fresh virtual machine, I don't have kubectl installed, so it's going to go in and install that. Now I'm going to skip this part and let it just deploy, and do heed warning that this will take longer than the K3S script. RKE2 is just slower to deploy, but just let it do its thing. Don't worry if it's taking a long time. Go grab a drink. Fingers crossed, if you've got my exact setup, it should work and it should deploy. I've done this about 15 to 20 times, but as always, I'm going to need you guys to help test this out, test out different operating systems, etc., and report back any errors or any fixes you made across the way. Okay, so now we're at the other end of the script, and just for reference, that took about 20 minutes to install on my end, probably because I've got terrible internet, so hopefully it was quicker for you. Now if we look at the bottom of the script, it still said pending when it was trying to assign an IP address for Rancher. So let's just run that command again. So what we need to do is kubectl get service -n for namespace and then /system. And fingers crossed we should now see the IP address. And yes, we do. We see it here, 192.168.360. So with any luck, I should be able to get this IP address, stick it into my browser, and get to the Rancher GUI. So let's try that now. I'm going to copy this, head over to my browser, and then let's see where we get to. Now, remember you need to put in HTTPS for this to work, but looks like it's working in my instance. So I'm going to click Advanced and Proceed. And this is using a self-signed certificate, so that's why you're getting that error. And brilliant, we've got the Rancher GUI. So the bootstrap password is actually in the script, and I put it as admin. So let's type in admin. And then you can either use the automatically generated password that's supplied here, do take a note of it, or you can click this and then specify your own. So I'm going to specify my own and then hit continue. And now we should get into the Rancher GUI. Now do remember that the first time you log into here, it might behave a little bit strange as it's spinning up and configuring things in the background, things like your password for example. But don't worry, it should now get into the Rancher GUI. And yeah, there we go, we can see. And the good news is we've got RKE2 up. We can see we're running Kubernetes version 1.26.9. And we've got 20 cores, 20 gigs of RAM, and all of those pods. So everything looks like it's working. Let's just click onto the menu and then go onto the nodes. And we'll see that those are all up and running. We've got 3 master nodes and we've got 2 worker nodes. So that's all good as well. So there you have it. You've got all of the basics now to replicate your existing K3S cluster, but with all the benefits of RKE2. And just to check that everything's working as we expect, let's go to the workloads, make sure you're on all namespaces. And if we scroll down, we can see that the cattle system, all of those are up and running. We can see that cert manager is fine as well. We can see that kube system is here. We can also see that we've got the kube-vip cloud provider. And if we look in pods, we can also see that we've got kube-vip running, which is exactly what we want, just here. So there you go. There's a single click install for RKE2. And now if you wanted to, you could use my existing Longhorn deployment and go and install that on top of this cluster. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you appreciate the time it's taken me to create that script. So let me know if you're going to be running this in your home lab or whether you're going to be sticking with K3S. Personally, I think if you're just starting out on your Kubernetes journey, then K3S is probably the one to go for. It's probably more popular within the home lab community, and certainly with the permissions, etc., it's probably going to be easier to get things up and running. I'm going to brave it with RKE2 and just see how I get on with it. Maybe I'll fall back to K3S, maybe the transition won't be too bad. I'll let you know. But anyway, if you found this video useful, please give it a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.